A very warm welcome to you. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and honestly incredibly powerful passage from the Quran. What's so amazing about it is that it works almost like a legal argument, just systematically deconstructing what it sees as flawed religious practices. So let's unpack how this powerful case is built, piece by piece. It all really boils down to this one central question. What happens when faith, which is supposed to be the source of guidance and light, what happens when it becomes foolish or even dangerous? We're going to see how this ancient text lays out a timeless framework for telling the difference between what it calls divine law and, well, human invention.
So, the whole argument kicks off with this foundational idea: universal, inescapable accountability. You can almost picture it like a cosmic courtroom drama, and the stage is being set for a moment when absolutely no one can say, "I didn't know."
And this right here is the question that frames the entire discussion. The text says that on the day of judgment, every single one of us, and even unseen beings, the jinn, will be asked this very thing. So, the foundation is set right away. A warning was sent, a message was delivered. And in this courtroom, there's just no escape hatch. The text explains that people will actually end up bearing witness against themselves. They'll fully admit they were warned, but that they let the distractions of this world fool them. It's a really profound statement on our own personal responsibility. Okay, so once that accountability is locked in, the argument starts to build its case. But before it critiques any specific actions, the text does something really important. It first lays out the unshakable principles of divine justice, kind of like a judge explaining the law before the trial even begins. This verse you see here, this is the absolute bedrock of the whole argument. It directly pushes back against any idea that God's punishment could ever be arbitrary or random. And this gives us our first core principle of divine fairness, and it's presented as totally non-negotiable. There is no punishment without a clear warning. God doesn't just act blindly. Messengers are sent as that fair warning system, making sure nobody is left in the dark.
Now, the second principle adds another layer of incredible detail to this system of justice. See, it's not a simple pass or fail situation. The word used is darajat, which literally means ranks, or levels, or degrees.
So what does that really mean? It means every single action is weighed, and the consequences, whether that's a reward or a punishment, are tailored precisely to the deeds. Nothing gets overlooked. The justice described here is meticulous. Then the text introduces this critical theological concept, al-ghani, or the self-sufficient. This principle makes one thing absolutely clear. God doesn't need our worship. It's not for His benefit at all. It's for ours. And that idea flows right into our third principle. Because God is completely self-sufficient, humanity is, in the grand scheme of things, replaceable. Nations can rise, nations can fall, but the divine plan is unstoppable. Judgment is coming, and no one can get in its way. All right, so with those three principles of justice firmly established, the text makes a major pivot. It starts using that legal framework to analyze and critique the actual religious practices that were common among the pre-Islamic Arabs. And here we get a fascinating case study in hypocrisy. The pagans would take a portion of their harvest and say, okay, this part's for God and this part's for our idols. But, their actions gave the game away. If the idol's share was ever a little light, they'd take from God's portion to top it off. But they would never do the reverse. The verdict on this is incredibly severe. The text doesn't just call it a mistake or a bad habit. It calls it an evil ruling, an evil judgment. It was a corrupt system they cooked up themselves, and it showed exactly where their true loyalties were. From corrupt offerings, the argument then moves into even darker territory. This next section tackles the most serious transgressions that the passage condemns: the killing of children and the invention of completely arbitrary religious laws. This is such a fascinating psychological breakdown. I mean, how could something as horrific as killing your own children, whether out of poverty or for some sacrifice, ever seem like a good idea? Well, the text explains that their so-called partners, or evil influences, made the crime seem beautiful and righteous, leading them to destroy themselves and completely confuse their own religion. And it wasn't just that one thing. The text then lists all these other rules it considers to be total human fabrications. And these weren't just quirky little customs. These were life and death laws about what you could eat, how you could work, and even specific weird prohibitions on what women were allowed to eat. So, the bottom line, the core accusation that ties all of this together, is really simple. These were not divine laws. Not at all. They were cruel, arbitrary rules that people invented and then had the audacity to blame on God, what the text calls inventing untruth about Allah. So,
How does this whole case conclude? After laying down the principles of justice and after exposing all the fabricated rituals, the text delivers its closing argument and, well, a final devastating verdict.
This concluding verse just brings everything together so powerfully. It links the foolish killing of children and the banning of God-given blessings directly to the central crime of inventing lies about God. It's the perfect summary of the entire case.
And the ultimate judgment? It's completely unambiguous. By doing these things, they have proven themselves to be utterly lost. The text declares that they have gone astray and were not in fact guided by any kind of divine truth whatsoever.
And this whole argument leaves us with a profound and timeless question. This ancient text laid out a detailed case against what it saw as religious corruption in 7th century Arabia. But the challenge it presents is truly universal. How does any society, ancient or modern, learn to tell the difference between authentic divine guidance and all the human-made rules, rituals, and fabrications that crop up along the way? It's a question that is definitely worth thinking about.